Shvanamangalam Srimadatam Bhuvi Garananti Ye Bhurida Jana. Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see many of you again. I think there might be a few new faces as well. Yes, who couldn't make it in the morning. We had a lively session this morning, introducing a new philosophical paradigm, Brahma Satyam, Jagat Satyam. In fact, to be a little bit more accurate, Brahma Shakti Satyam, Jagat Satyam. Brahma Shakti. The phrase Brahma Shakti, does anyone know who coined the phrase? At least as far as I'm aware. To characterize Sri Ramakrishna's philosophy, Brahma Shakti. Does anybody know? This is difficult, actually. This is like a deep dive into the Ramakrishna literature. Srimad Darshan is a multi-volume book. It's like the gospel, except regarding the life and conversations of Mohanananda Gupta, the author of Kathamrita. Another monk recorded conversations with him. And in the course of those conversations, M refers to Sri Ramakrishna's understanding of God as Brahma Shakti, with a hyphen. And I really like that, because it conveys in one phrase, Brahma Shakti Abhed, the inseparability of Brahman and Shakti. So if we were to capture Sri Ramakrishna's Vijnana Vedanta in one formula, it could be Brahma Shakti Satyam, Jagat Satyam. That's what we were discussing this morning. And this afternoon, I thought that it would be appropriate and illuminating to continue this theme. What is reality? Is the world real? What is the relationship between this world and God? These are the questions that we want to tackle today. But it's a class. This morning was a talk. This is a class. By class, what I mean is, it's based on a text. And I want there to be some interaction and discussion. And I want you to really think deeply. Like in an academic class, students are expected to think for themselves. I want you to think for yourselves as well. Many of you have studied the gospel, I assume. At least, how many of you have read at least parts of the gospel in some language? Yes, good. And how many in the original Bangla? Good, a large number. So I'll be reading some passages from the original Bangla and explaining in English. But before I get into it, I wanted to mention a few preliminary things. First of all, the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. Different religious traditions have different religious scriptures, different texts. Within Hinduism, there are many, many books with the teachings of great saints and dialogues of great saints. This morning, this gentleman talked about Ramana Maharshi. There's a wonderful book, Talks with Ramana Maharshi. Nisargadatta Maharaj, there's a book based on his teachings called I Am That, which is also excellent. There are countless others. Papa Ramdas has an autobiography called In Quest of God. He was a great bhakta of Sri Ramakrishna also. Even though his Ishta Devata was Rama, he loved Sri Ramakrishna and he visited Dakshineshwar. And in this autobiography, he mentions that when he walked into Sri Ramakrishna's room, he went into a state of ecstasy and rolled on the floor for a half hour, rolling back and forth in ecstasy, just thinking of Sri Ramakrishna and the fact that he was there. So anyway, there are many books, but I would say that the gospel stands apart in certain respects. It's a very unique spiritual text. It's a priceless treasure because it doesn't just contain the teachings of Sri Ramakrishna. It's a recording of his minute-to-minute, moment-to-moment behavior, activities. And it's really remarkable. And not just that, another thing that I think is really unique about it is that I've read a lot of the world's spiritual literature. The humor in this book is unparalleled. It's hilarious. He's hilarious. Constantly cracking jokes, but always with some spiritual meaning behind it. And it's really unique. Jesus didn't seem to be particularly funny. Ramana Maharshi makes jokes once in a while, but you can't compare. As a comedian, Sri Ramakrishna takes the cake. And so there's by the way, so if you're interested more in Sri Ramakrishna's humor, I'm giving a Sunday talk in Hollywood the day after I come back from Texas, so 25th, so this coming next Sunday, called Sri Ramakrishna's Jokes. So stay tuned for that. Okay, so it's a really, really unique document. Another thing that makes it unique is that it contains the highest philosophical teachings. Full. I mean, on every page you'll see the highest, loftiest spiritual teachings and philosophical teachings. And at the same time, so the highest philosophy is also combined with extremely practical advice about spiritual practice, how you should live in this world as a householder, as a renunciate. He speaks to everybody in a very simple and practical way, using very homely parables. And so it's a very practical spiritual manual, while also being the highest kind of philosophical teachings, while also having, so it's a combination of both. Bhagavad Gita, many of you have probably read at least parts of the Bhagavad Gita. When you recite it traditionally in Sanskrit, at the end of every chapter, there's what's called a colophon. Om Srimad Bhagavad Gita Su Upanishatsu, and then Brahma Vidyayam Yoga Shastre, and then it goes on. The Gita contains the highest Brahma Vidya, knowledge of Brahman, the highest spiritual teachings, and it's a Yoga Shastra. It's a practical spiritual manual, and one can say the same thing about the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. It has both. Why do I emphasize this? Well, as Swapnama made clear this morning in her introduction, I'm an academic philosopher on top of being a monk. And so I love philosophy. I love thinking about philosophy. I love trying to understand Sri Ramakrishna's philosophical teachings. So, and you won't be surprised, right? This morning we talked all about high philosophy. This class is also going to be focusing on Sri Ramakrishna's teachings on this world. Is the world real or unreal? And many of you might be thinking, well, that's because he's a philosopher, but didn't Sri Ramakrishna used to say that if you go to a mango orchard, why bother to count the leaves? Am khao, am keteshcha am khao. If you've come to eat mangoes, eat the mangoes. You're just giving us a headache, Maharaj. I know. So I know that some of you might be thinking this. And so I wanted to, as a good philosopher, anticipate your objection. In philosophy, you have to imagine, in traditional Indian philosophy, you have to imagine what your objectors might say to your philosophy. It's called Purva Paksha. So I'm guessing that some of you have this, have been thinking about this. Oh, this guy's a long-winded philosopher, but it's not practical. What do we do in our daily lives, in our daily spiritual? How is this stuff relevant to us? We're not going to be Vijnanis anytime soon. So let me begin before getting into the passage of the Kathamrita that I wanted to talk about. I wanted to explain to you why understanding Sri Ramakrishna's philosophical teachings is essential for every spiritual aspirant in our tradition. Not just me because I'm a philosophy dork, but everybody. Why? Let me take a slight detour into a different tradition. Buddhism. There are 4 noble truths in Buddhism. What is the 4th noble truth? Does anyone know the first noble truth? What's the first noble truth? Everything is suffering. Yeah, everything is suffering. Okay, we don't have to go through all 4, but now what is the 4th noble truth? Yes, what's that called? What is that pathway? Very good. Ashtanga Marga, the Noble Eightfold Path. That is the Buddhist sadhana for attaining nirvana. Okay? So there are 8 factors. Okay? Better not to call them steps because they're not necessarily sequential in that way. But the foundation is the first factor. What is the first factor? Anybody? No. It's the 4th noble truth, contains the whole Noble Eightfold Path. What is the first factor in the Noble Eightfold Path? No. Samyag Drishti. Right view. Right understanding. And then you get all the different spiritual practices. You get ethical behavior, you get mindfulness, you get meditation, you get samadhi, all these things, all the wonderful things. But the basis of all spiritual practice is the right understanding, the right framework, the right worldview. Why? Because all spiritual practice presupposes a worldview. Just to give you a simple example, many of you are probably initiated. What does it mean? You're given Ramakrishna mantra. Who is Sri Ramakrishna? That's a philosophical question. Who is Sri Ramakrishna? Is he really an incarnation? Or is he a kind of Is he as an incarnation only empirically real? Vyavaharika satta. If we bring in Advaita Vedanta, we'll say that's true from the standpoint of ignorance. But ultimately, he is Nirguna Brahman and nothing more. And there's no Shakti. He's not Shakti, he's only Nirguna Brahman. Another person, so who is Sri Ramakrishna? Secondly, what is the goal of all our spiritual practices? What are we trying to achieve? That's a philosophical question. Remember, we had discussion about what is liberation. That's a philosophical question. Isn't that important for spiritual aspirants? We may not get liberation anytime soon, but knowing where we're going on the spiritual path is absolutely essential. Otherwise, how do we know we're going in the right direction? What are we trying to achieve? You have to set a goal for yourself if you really want to make progress. That's true in any walk of life, with regard to any secular activities as well. It's logical. If you don't have a clear sense of the goal, you're not going to be able to implement the means properly. Okay? So this is the basic idea behind wanting to have a deep understanding of Sri Ramakrishna's philosophical teachings. Another thing is, if you bring in this mango orchard analogy and say that, why don't we just eat the mangoes? But this raises an interesting question. If you study the Kathamrita from cover to cover, what you'll find is there are at least two kinds of teachings. One is very lofty philosophical teachings. Another is teachings that are very practical regarding spiritual practice, engage in sadasat vichara, discrimination between what's permanent, what's impermanent, pray to God in this way, take the Lord's name, many other spiritual practices, right? Now, Sri Ramakrishna was God. Couldn't he have just given teachings on sadhana, on spiritual practices? He could have. Why did Sri Ramakrishna choose to give so many high philosophical teachings in the first place? To waste our time? Or just to speak to the few Medhanandas in the world who are interested in philosophy? No, because he felt that it's essential for everybody. Because having the right philosophical worldview is indispensable as a foundation for any spiritual practice. The two are inseparable. Just like Brahman and Shakti are inseparable, Sri Ramakrishna's philosophical teachings are inseparable from his teachings on spiritual practice. That's also, I think, the logic behind making the first factor in the Buddhist Noble Eightfold Path, samyak drishti. Having a right view is a foundation for all subsequent spiritual practices in any tradition, whether it's Buddhism or Christianity. That's why Christians are so set on having a proper creed worked out, because you better know what you're talking about, and you better have a clear idea of what your beliefs are. And then on that basis, you worship Christ and do everything else. Okay? All right, so that's a brief justification for our ensuing philosophical discussion. So now, I want us to focus on a particular passage from the Gospel. Namely, this is from December 16th, 1883. And Mohandaranath Gupta, who has studied a lot of Vedanta, Indian philosophy, Western philosophy, and is a very thoughtful person, he asks Sri Ramakrishna a very telling question. He says, so Muni, Jagat ki mitha, is this world unreal? Is this world unreal? And Sri Ramakrishna gives a very, very detailed and profound answer to this question. And I hope you can see the obvious kind of dovetailing with the morning's talk, Brahma Satyam, Jagat Satyam. So what I'll do is first read the first part of Sri Ramakrishna's response in Bangla, and then I'll give the translation, first reading Nikhilanandaji's translation, but then pointing out places where I respectfully disagree with Nikhilanandaji. Okay, so, Muni, Jagat ki mitha, Sri Ramakrishna. Mitha keno? ও সব বিচারের কথা। প্রথমটা নেতি নেতি বিচার করবার সময় তিনি জীব নন, জগৎ নন, চতুর্বিংশী তত্ত্ব নন হয়ে যায়। এসব স্বপ্নবৎ হয়ে যায়। তারপর অনুলোম বিলোম, তখন তিনি জীব জগৎ হয়েছেন বোধ হয়। তুমি সিঁড়ি ধরে ধরে ছাদে উঠলে, কিন্তু যতক্ষণ ছাদ বোধ ততক্ষণ সিঁড়িও আছে। যার উঁচু বোধ আছে তার নিচু বোধও আছে। আবার ছাদে উঠে দেখলে যে জিনিসের ছাদ তৈরি হয়েছে, ইট, চুন, সুরকি, সেই জিনিসেই সিঁড়ি তৈরি হয়েছে। আর যেমন বেলের কথা বলেছি, যার অটল আছে তার তলও আছে। So let's pause there first. Nikhilanji's translation. M, is the world unreal? I have no problem with that. That seems accurate. Master, why should it be unreal? Next sentence. According to Nikhilanji's translation, what you are asking is a matter for philosophical discussion. Here's my first disagreement with Nikhilanji. Thakur says, Oshab bicharer kotha. Nikhilanji decides to translate this as, what you are asking is a matter for philosophical discussion. I don't think that's at all right. I think it's extremely misleading. Oshab bicharer kotha, vichara. See, anybody, even people who don't know Bangla, will recognize that bichar in Bengali means vichara. Reasoning, that's true. But it's not any kind of philosophical reasoning that he's talking about. How do we know that? Remember what I said this morning. Context is very important. Let's go on to read. He explains what kind of vichara he's talking about in the very next sentence. Prothomta neti neti vichar korar shomoy, korbar shomoy tini jeeb non jagat non neti neti vichara is what he's thinking of. Not this, that kind of reasoning of classical Advaita Vedanta. It's very obvious. Because remember the staircase analogy that I had quoted this morning from our talk? You do neti neti vichara when you climb up the steps saying Brahman is not this, Brahman is not that, Brahman is not my body, Brahman is not my mind, until you reach the roof, right? Neti neti vichara of classical Advaita Vedanta. So it seems to me that a far more accurate translation of this sentence, Osha bichared kotha, is that is how Advaitic Jnana Yogis reason. That is how followers of Shankara's classical Advaita Vedanta reason. Because that's what he's explaining. That's the kind of vichara that he's talking about. But you see, in the context, M is asking, is the world unreal? His first response is, why should it be unreal? That's how Advaitic Jnanis reason, which means he's not identifying himself with that tradition. This is the other thing to keep in mind, right? And we're going to find out what his own view is. He's contrasting the view of classical Advaita Vedanta with his own standpoint. So he's saying, oh, the world is unreal according to these classical Advaitins who reason using this neti neti method. Brahman is not this, not that. But here's my view. This is what Sri Ramakrishna, he goes on to say, Tarpor onulom bilom. This is the next thing. Oh, so let me keep reading from the translation. So Sri Ramakrishna says, in the beginning, when a man reasons following the Vedantic method of not this, he realizes that Brahman is not the living beings, not the universe, not the 24 cosmic principles. Remember from this morning, we talked about this. All these things become like dreams to him. So Nikhilanji is also, he recognizes that this is neti neti vichara. But for some reason, he chooses to translate vichara in that previous sentence as general philosophical discussion, but it's definitely not general philosophical discussion. This is the way that followers of Shankara's tradition reason. Then Swami Nikhilanji says, then comes the affirmation of what has been denied. And the original Bangla here is again very technical. Anulom bilom. 2 words. Anulom bilom. Anuloma viloma in Sanskrit. And Nikhilanji says that this means you first do this neti neti vichara, not this. Ultimately, you affirm what you initially negated or denied. This is what he's saying. The idea is okay, but it seems to me that a more accurate translation of anuloma viloma will be involution and evolution. Involution and evolution. If you look at the original etymology, Sanskrit etymology of these terms, and the interesting thing is, other places in the gospel where Sri Ramakrishna uses these terms, anuloma viloma, onulom vilom, Nikhilanji chooses to translate those terms as involution, evolution. Sometimes he does, but he's not consistent about it. So it seems to me that we should consistently translate anuloma viloma as involution and evolution. Now you might be saying, well, that makes it even more confusing. What does it even mean? What does Sri Ramakrishna mean by involution and evolution? Let's keep reading then. So this is, again, I'm just reading Nikhilanji's translation. He feels, after this anuloma viloma, he feels that God himself has become the universe and all living beings. He feels that God himself has become the universe and all living beings. So this is my third quibble with Nikhilanji. Throughout the gospel, he tends to translate God as he, capital H, he. And I think one of the main reasons is that he was addressing a Western Christian audience in the 40s or something. And they're used to thinking of God as Father. They don't have a concept of Divine Mother. But in the context of Sri Ramakrishna, when Sri Ramakrishna is talking about God, almost invariably he's thinking of God as Divine Mother, as she. Why? Because his Ishta Devata was Kali, as everybody knows. So I think that throughout the gospel, unless he's specifically talking about a male deity, if he's talking about Shiva, I understand. If he's talking about Krishna, I understand he. In general, we should translate God as she throughout the Kathamrita. That's my third objection. So I will now change that translation. So he feels that God himself become the universe and all living beings. So now this helps us to understand what he means by anuloma viloma, involution and evolution. The Upanishads use a very vivid metaphor for this, to explain this. The Mundaka Upanishad has a famous metaphor. It brings up this question, how does Brahman relate to this world? And the Upanishad says, Yathor nanabi srijate grinnate cha. That's the first metaphor, and I just want to focus on that. Just as a spider spins out a cobweb, where does this cobweb come from? From a spider. From itself, from its own body. The cobweb comes out of itself, and then after some time, and this may not be fully accurate, but as a metaphor, it works nicely. And then after some time, the spider withdraws the same cobweb back into itself. That doesn't normally happen as far as I'm aware, but in any case. So it spins out the cobweb from out of its own body, and then it'll withdraw the cobweb back into its body. Involution is the state in which the cobweb is in the spider's body. Evolution is that same cobweb manifest outside of the spider's body. But in either case, notice that the cobweb is one with the spider. The cobweb is also a manifestation of the spider. It's made of the same stuff as the spider because it comes out of the guts of the spider, right? This is the idea. Likewise, this entire world of names and forms, this world of the 24 cosmic principles, is nothing but Brahman in its manifest form. Brahman itself has become the 24 cosmic principles. Evolution. But what does involution correspond to? At the end of a kalpa, what happens is the universe contracts. I think there's like a big crunch in physics. There's a big bang in the beginning, then there's a big crunch eventually. The big crunch is when this manifest universe of names and forms contracts into a seed state, bija avastha. That is the same world of names and forms in the seed state. What's going to happen eventually to that seed? It's going to manifest again because Hindus believe in a cyclical theory of creation. Contraction, expansion, contraction, expansion. In other words, anuloma viloma. Involution, evolution. Involution, evolution. But the world is all along, the world never disappears. The world is either in a manifest state, in the state of evolution, or it's in the latent state, in the seed form, which is involution. But the world never vanishes, the world never completely ceases to exist. Do you follow? Which means the world is real. So this is the connection with M's question. M's question is the world unreal? He says, no, it's not unreal. My view, unlike the view of followers of Shankara, is that Jagat is not mithya, it's satya, because it's nothing but God. Either in the manifest form, in the form of this evolved universe, or in the latent form, in a seed form, which is the involuted form of the same universe, which is nothing but God. Like the spider throwing out a cobweb out of itself and then withdrawing the cobweb back into itself. So there's so much philosophical depth packed into those two words, anulom vilom. And I think that it's more accurate to translate it as involution, evolution, for the reasons I gave you, than the way that Nikhilanji does, than the affirmation of what has been denied. The logic is correct. You're affirming what you, just as in the staircase analogy, Sri Ramakrishna says, the person doing neti vichara says Brahman is not this, not that, reaches the roof, which signifies knowledge of Brahman. But the Vijnani, after reaching the roof, looks back on the staircase and says, wait a minute, but the staircase is made of the same materials as the roof, bricks, lime, and brick dust. So yes, it's true that the Vijnani affirms what the Jnani denies, But anuloma viloma has a very precise meaning, and it seems to me that the precise meaning is involution and evolution. That's what I'm trying to get at. Then Sri Ramakrishna says, after using this staircase metaphor, he says, further, I have given the illustration of the bale fruit. Does anybody know the bale fruit analogy that Sri Ramakrishna uses? Ki? What? Yeah, exactly. But give a complete sentence. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Very good. Yeah. I'll give you an example. I'll give you a direct quotation. This comes from the same day he explains the bale fruit. He says, how can you eliminate from the reality the universe and its living beings? If you do that, it will lack its full weight, as he said. You cannot find out the total weight of the bale fruit if you eliminate the seeds and shell. Likewise, you cannot grasp the whole of reality if you only focus on Brahman and ignore this world of names and forms, and ignore the reality of individual souls, and ignore the reality of Saguna Brahman, the personal God, Shakti. You have to take everything as an all-encompassing divine reality. In one simple phrase, Sri Ramakrishna says, Shob jodiye ekti. Shob jodiye ekti. You have to take everything together. That's Advaita. Remember, we're talking about Vijnana Vedanta is also Advaita, but it's an all-encompassing Advaita. One that doesn't exclude anything or dismiss anything as unreal. So individual souls, all names and forms, the personal God, are all part of that same all-encompassing divine totality. That's integral Advaita. That's whatever you want to call it. But that seems to be Sri Ramakrishna's view. And notice again how important context is. He begins by saying the world is unreal according to Shankara school. He doesn't use the word Shankara, he doesn't name Shankara, but he does say neti neti vichara, which clearly corresponds to Shankara's philosophy, Shankara's sadhana, the Jnana Yoga sadhana. So it's clear. And then he says, but that's not my view. My view is the Vijnani's view that Brahman has become the 24 cosmic principles. Now, then he goes on and says a few other things. Oh, another thing he says, which is also important. After saying, Ar jemon beler kotha bolechi, so I just explained the bale fruit analogy. The next sentence, Jar otol ache tar tolo ache. Atala, in Sanskrit, Atala means unchanging, completely static. Tol means the opposite, because achas is a negation in Sanskrit and in Bengali. Tol means it has movement, it's dynamic. So that which is static is also dynamic. This is a very tantric teaching, actually. You'll find this in Tantra. That's why Shiva and Shakti are inseparable. An example that he would use is Shaparta Tijjogoti, a snake and its wriggling motion. The same snake, when coiled up, is like Nirguna Brahman. It's inactive, Nishkriya, the Brahman of Advaita Vedanta. That same snake, when it's wiggling around, right, moving, you know how snakes move. It's the same snake in motion, that's Shakti. It's the same reality in different states. The first state is static, the second state is dynamic. So that's what he means in this last sentence, Jar otol achet tar tolo achet. Now, he doesn't leave it at that. He says a few more things. Then he comes back to M's question because he thinks it's extremely important to get clear on whether the world is real or unreal. So let me read to you another passage, just a few moments later. Sri Ramakrishna is still thinking about the question. M had asked this question, Jagat ki mitha, is the world unreal? Sri Ramakrishna, Monir Proti, he's looking straight at M again. Jagat mitha keno hobe? Again, the same thing, he says, exactly what he said before, but again, he's re-emphasizing it in a slightly different way. Jagat mitha keno hobe? O shab bicharer kotha. Exactly the same first two sentences. That means he's really emphasizing this. That people who think that the world is unreal are the followers of Shankara's Advaita Vedanta. But that's not my view. Then he says, তাঁকে দর্শন হলে তখন বোঝা যায় যে তিনিই জীব জগৎ হয়েছেন. After realizing God, the Vijnani realizes that Brahman has become the 24 cosmic principles. Then he says, he's speaking about his own spiritual experiences. He says, আমায় মা কালী ঘরে দেখিয়ে দিলেন যে মাই সব হয়েছেন. দেখিয়ে দিলেন সব চিন্ময়, প্রতিমা চিন্ময়, বেদী চিন্ময়, কোষাকুষি চিন্ময়, চৌকটি চিন্ময়, মার্বেলের পাথর সব চিন্ময়। ঘরের ভিতর দেখি সব যেন রসে রয়েছে, সচ্চিতানন্দ রসে। কালী ঘরের সম্মুখে একজন দুষ্ট লোককে দেখলাম, কিন্তু তারও ভিতরে তাঁর শক্তি জ্বলজ্বল করতে দেখলাম। তাই তো বিড়ালকে ভোগের লুচি খাইয়েছিলাম। দেখলাম মাই সব হয়েছেন, বিড়াল পর্যন্ত। বিড়াল মিন্স cat. I'll get to the translation. তখন খাজাঞ্চি সেজবাবুকে চিঠি লিখলে যে ভট্টাচার্য মহাশয় ভোগের লুচি বিড়ালদের খাওয়াচ্ছেন। সেজবাবু আমার অবস্থা বুঝতো। পত্রের উত্তরে লিখলে উনি যা করেন তাতে কোনো কথা বলে না। তাকে লাভ করলে এইগুলি ঠিক দেখা যায়। তিনি জীব জগৎ চতুর্বিংশী তত্ত্ব হয়েছেন। Okay. So for those who don't know Bangla, sorry, I put you through a lot of Bangla, but let me read to you the translation now. Shri Ram Krishna. Why should the world be unreal? That, and then again, Nikhilanji, that is a speculation of the philosophers. And again, I think that's a real mistake. So that is how Advaitic Jnana Yogis reason, I think, is a better translation. Then Nikhilanji continues. After realizing God, one sees that it is God herself. I'm silently changing himself to herself now from now on. One sees that it is God herself who has become the universe and all living beings. The Divine Mother revealed to me in the Kali temple that it was she who had become everything. She showed me that everything was divine consciousness, Shab Chinmoy. The image was consciousness, the altar was consciousness, the water vessels were consciousness, Koshakushi Chinmoy. The door sill was consciousness, the marble floor was consciousness, all was consciousness. I found everything inside the room soaked, as it were, in bliss. The bliss of Satchitananda. I saw a wicked man in front of the Kali temple, but in him also I saw the Shakti of the Divine Mother vibrating. That was why I fed a cat with the food that was to be offered to the Divine Mother. I clearly perceived that the Divine Mother herself had become everything, even the cat. After realizing God, one sees all this aright, that it is she who has become the universe, living beings, and the 24 cosmic principles. Tini jeev jagat choturbingshi tattva hoyechen. So this is extremely important because here it's clear that he's not just an ordinary intellectual philosopher. He's speaking on the basis of his own spiritual experiences, specifically the spiritual experience of Vijnana. He sees absolutely everything, all names and forms, as different real manifestations of the same divine Satchitananda. Another metaphor that he uses elsewhere, also recorded in the gospel, he says, I was once walking and suddenly I saw everything as if it was made of wax. Shab momed. Shab momed. It's a very interesting analogy. This should remind us, I think we talked this morning about the Chandogya Upanishad and how the Upanishad describes the relation between Brahman and this world in terms of clay, unshaped clay and different clay pots, gold, remember, molten gold, and when you shape that gold into ornaments, different ornaments, bracelets and necklaces and earrings, right? Notice how similar this wax metaphor is. The whole point of the metaphor is anything you make out of wax, just like we have like Ripley's Believe It or Not in the US, we have Madame Tussauds in London, very lifelike wax figurines of contemporary figures. I think there's one that was just made of Donald Trump and Boris Johnson and other things. Okay. And it's as if they're there, right there. So Sri Ramakrishna is having this vision, this Madame Tussauds kind of vision of everything as divine consciousness. He sees everything as divine consciousness playfully manifesting in different forms. Now you might say, well, but followers of Shankara also say Sarvam Khalvidam Brahma, everything is Brahman. This is a common objection. I've heard it many times. But Shankara and his followers do not hold that everything is Brahman in the same sense that the Vijnani sees everything as Brahman. So what's the difference? This is a key question to gain philosophical clarity. What is the difference when Shankara says everything is Brahman and when Sri Ramakrishna says everything is Brahman? The difference is the following. You have to keep in mind Shankara's philosophical framework of Advaita Vedanta and Sri Ramakrishna's different philosophical framework of Vijnana Vedanta. That's the key. In his commentary on the Brahma Sutra, Shankara talks about Chandogya Upanishad's famous statement, the mantra, Sarvam Kalvidam Brahma. All indeed is Brahman. And Shankara gives a very simple explanation. He says, yes, it's true, everything is Brahman. But what's the point of making the statement? And the original Sanskrit is, Prapancha Pravilapanatham. Prapancha Pravilapanatham. Prapancha means this universe, Jagat. Pravilapanatham, artham means with the purpose of, and Pravilapana means dissolving. The Upanishads say everything is Brahman in order to dissolve this world of names and forms, not to affirm the reality of this world of names and forms. So just to make it even simpler to understand, the idea is, Shankara says everything is Brahman in this sense. This table is Brahman. In what sense? Shankara will say, yeah, remove the tableness from the table, and what's left is Brahman. This laptop is Brahman. In what sense, according to Shankara? Remove the laptopness from this laptop, what's left is the same Brahman. So according to Shankara, Brahman is the substratum, the universal substratum of all names and forms. But the names and forms themselves are not Brahman. Subtract all names and forms from this universe, subtract this laptop and the table and the chairs, and what's left is Brahman. Sri Ramakrishna says, yeah, we'll get to the Q&A, but let me finish first and then we'll go. I know, he's itching to say something now. So. And Sri Ramakrishna says, the names and forms themselves are Brahman. Are you following the difference here? Shankara says, look at the world around you, full of names and forms. Subtract all the names and forms and what's left is Brahman. Sri Ramakrishna says, don't subtract anything. Shab jodiye akti. You don't need to subtract anything at all. The table actually is divine consciousness. The laptop actually is the same divine consciousness in a different form. Absolutely every name and form is a real manifestation of Brahma Shakti. It's all the play, the real divine Leela of the Divine Mother. Brahma Shakti Satyam, Jagat Satyam. And this is on the basis of his own spiritual experience of Vijnana. So now, I think I covered the main things, and okay, but one thing I want to say. Remember Turiyanandaji. Remember I mentioned that he wrote this wonderful letter in 1919, a few years before he left his body. Basically, I see it as a kind of commentary on his own final words on his deathbed. Brahma Shatto, Jagat Shatto, Shab Shatto, Shatte Pran Pratishtito. Brahman is true. This world is true. Everything is real. Everything is true. Life itself is grounded in truth. In this letter, he specifically talks about this wonderful ecstatic spiritual experience of Vijnana that Sri Ramakrishna is explaining. When he's doing puja and he sees everything down to the cat and the wicked man, everything, and the puja vessels, everything is divine consciousness. How do we know this? Of course, we would be a different class if we talked about Turiyanandaji's letter. I'm just mentioning one part of it. Sarvanandaji, the person who asked Turiyanandaji the question, what is Sri Ramakrishna's philosophy? Sarvanandaji is bothered by this statement of Sri Ramakrishna's because he was an expert in Shankara's philosophy. And he said, but wait a minute, when I read Gospel, Sri Ramakrishna is talking about this remarkable spiritual experience of Vijnana, when he actually sees names and forms themselves as divine consciousness. And he mentions Koshakushi Brahma. He mentions that the puja vessels also are Brahman. And he says, wait a minute, Shankara wouldn't have accepted that because he knew his Shankara. Sarvanandaji I'm talking about. He knew that. And he said, Shankara believed in Vivartavada. Vivartavada, does anyone know what Vivartavada means? No? You should if you've watched Savarpanji's lectures. Yeah. Yeah, what? I can't hear you. No. That would be like Vivada, for instance, but Vivartavada. Vivartavada, Vada means doctrine. Vivarta, it's a technical doctrine. In classical Advaita Vedanta, this is the doctrine that this world of names and forms is an illusory appearance of Brahman. Vivarta means illusory appearance. The world doesn't actually exist. It's an illusion. Just as if there's a rope on the floor and I mistakenly think it's a snake, and then later I come closer to it and I realize, wait a minute, that's not a snake, it's a rope. Does it make sense for me to say, oh, it used to be a snake, now it's a rope? No, it was a rope all along. I only mistakenly saw it as a snake, right? In the same way, because we are ignorant of Brahman, we think that I'm lecturing to you now and that you're sitting on these chairs, everything is different from each other. That's because we're fools, according to Shankara. But when we know the truth, we realize that there's only Brahman, there only was Brahman all along. The world is just a vivarta, an illusory appearance, but in fact, it never appeared to anybody. The ultimate standpoint of Advaita is ajata, which means there never was a world at all. It's not even a figment of our imagination, because then there has to be an imaginer, and there was no imaginer. There's only Brahman, and there was only Brahman all along. So, that's the context. Now, Sarvanandaji is saying, so Sri Ramakrishna had this experience of the puja vessels, the cat, everything is Brahman. This doesn't seem to tally with Shankara's Vivartavada. He specifically mentions that term. Turiyananji in his response says the following, and I'm going to read from my translation of his letter. He says, he's explaining Sri Ramakrishna's philosophy. He says, God is everything in the world. God is everything in the world. Names and forms come from God and reside in God. He's specifically saying Namarupa. Then he says, look at the metaphors that Turiyananji uses. Waves, foam, bubbles, these are nothing but water. I don't care if this agrees with your Vivartavada or not. It's very strong language. I don't care whether the view I'm explaining, which is Sri Ramakrishna's position, agrees with Shankara's Vivartavada or not, which you believe. A person who has realized this truth that Brahman is all cannot say that this world is unreal. Remember, this is Turiyananji, echoing Sri Ramakrishna's teachings. And I'll read the Bangla. Tini shob, naam roop to tate ke ebong tate, torongo fan budbud jol chhara to kichui na. Ete tomar bivartavada thak ar jak. Ei sotto je dekheche, she ar mitha bolte pare na. Exactly like Sri Ramakrishna's response to M. Turiyananji is saying, Sri Ramakrishna's view from the spiritual standpoint of Vijnana is that names and forms themselves are Brahman. Not that you subtract names and forms from the world and what's left is Brahman. The names and forms themselves are Brahman. Exactly like clay can be shaped into different pots. You don't say that the pots are unreal, that they're illusory appearances of clay. The pots are nothing but clay, but really manifested in different forms. The golden ornaments are nothing but gold. You don't say that the bracelet is an unreal manifestation, an unreal appearance of gold. You say it's a real formation of gold, as long as it lasts, right? Okay, so I think that's enough. And so now you had your hand up, so now please ask your question, but let's bring the mic. Yeah. Yeah.
What I heard from you is also said.
Let's bring the mic. Who has the mic? So can you go up there? Yeah, that'll be better. Yeah. Well, then that's why you need a mic.
Okay. You also mentioned about while Sri Ramakrishna explaining Vivartavada,
Yeah.
he also mentioned about Sat Chit Ananda. Brahman is Sat Chit Ananda.
Yeah.
Okay. Out of those three, Sat is Prakriti, Chit is Purusha, Ananda is the Tattvam of the Purusha. So Brahman and Prakriti are different because that's the way it is defined. Sat Chit Ananda is the sum and total of the Brahman. The Sat is, when we look at the world, the chair, the table, you're all mentioning, these are the physical forms. Okay, we can take out the chair and table, but still, Sat is remaining. Sat means the basic principle behind the world. That Sat is also called Shakti. So how do you explain this? Because there are two ingredients in the Brahma definition itself, Sat and Chit.
Where does Sri Ramakrishna define Sat in the way that you're defining
it? Read it, you know.
Where? Show me. I just read it, so I can read it again, but he never says what you just said.
I thought
He
I
never
heard
says
about-
that Sat is equivalent to Prakriti. He never
No,
says
he
that
did not
Chit is
define all
equivalent.
that. But in the reading I heard
Yeah.
you say, Sat, Chit, Ananda.
The whole thing is Brahman, Sat Chit Ananda. He never does one-to-one correspondence and saying Sat corresponds to chairs and tables,
Okay.
and Chit corresponds to you and me. He
Yes,
doesn't
sir. How
say
do
that.
you define Sat then? What is Sat in your reference?
It's completely irrelevant how I define it. What's important is how Sri Ramakrishna defines it.
Yes.
He doesn't individually define the words.
What is Sri Ramakrishna is defining Sat?
He doesn't.
He does not?
Not in the context of the term Sat Chit Ananda. He defines it in another context. He says Shodha Shod Bichar, for instance. That's one of the sadhanas he recommends. You should discriminate between Sat and Asat. And you know how he describes it? How he defines Sat and Asat? The permanent and the impermanent.
Yes.
Nitya and Anitya. That's how he defines it.
Okay. Like
Sat will be Nitya and Asat would be Anitya.
right. It's like a seed form,
Hmm.
like you talked about cyclic manner,
Yeah,
It goes into seed form
yeah,
at the pralaya time.
yeah.
And when the creation starts, the whole thing comes
Manifest.
out,
Yeah,
Okay?
yeah.
So the whole thing, disappears. In other words, Jagat.
It doesn't disappear, of course, because it's in seed form. Right?
For example, the Big Bang Theory,
Yeah.
the whole world we are seeing,
Yeah,
at one time, like 13, 14 billion years ago,
Yeah.
it wasn't there. It's in a seed form.
okay. Wasn't there and seed form are not the same thing, because it was there in seed form.
Yeah.
That's not the same thing. Let's be precise. Yeah.
No,
And-
sir,
yeah.
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
When it goes into the non-form,
The what
no
form? The-
no form for the world, you and
Yeah.
I are here
Yeah.
in 2023. Okay?
23, yeah, yeah.
14 billion years ago,
Yeah.
we both, all of us, were in the seed form. That's
Okay.
the Sat. In other words,
Again, he's not saying. No, Sri Ramakrishna never says that. Okay, but where are you going with all this?
Okay.
Can you formulate it as a question or a challenge or an objection?
No,
Yeah.
my question really
yeah.
is, here we are seeing each other.
Yeah.
100 years from now, and nobody's there with any body. We're all
Yeah.
not live here. Okay?
So what?
So same way, the whole world
Yeah.
disappears.
Okay.
Another several billions years from now,
Yeah.
14 billion years ago, there was nothing. It was all Sunya.
Yeah, no. So again, this is not even scientific. What you just said is not true. What happens in a cremation? Hindus cremate bodies. Do we disappear? Does a dead body? No! It gets transformed. What about the law of the conservation of energy? Nothing can disappear. Any physicist will tell you that.
That transformation.
It changes form, actually.
No. That
Nothing
transformation
disappears.
Itself is,
But now we're going to get into physics lessons, so there's no point. But if you have a question, please ask it. Otherwise, we should move on. Okay. So if you have a question, please ask it now, or forever hold your peace, and then we can go on to have other people ask.
I'm not questioning Sri Ramakrishna.
Ah.
I'm trying to clarify.
It's not clear what the question is. That's what I'm.
My question is,
Yeah.
the Sat and Chit, Prakriti, like Shakti you're mentioning, Shakti and Sat.
The premise of your question is flawed because Sri Ramakrishna never identifies Sat with Prakriti. So I can't answer a question which doesn't make sense.
That's what Shankara uses, Sat, Chit, Ananda. That's what he.
So you see how there's a difference between talking about how Shankara interprets Satchitananda and how Sri Ramakrishna does. Why should you assume that they're the same? That's the mistake. Remember the first interpretive principle from this morning. You were listening carefully. Don't bring in concepts which are external to Sri Ramakrishna's own teachings. If Sri Ramakrishna doesn't use that term, then don't bring it up. So what if Shankara interprets Satchitananda that way? Why should we assume that Sri Ramakrishna does? Because there's so many great acharyas. Why should we focus on one and assume that Sri Ramakrishna follows Shankara? Why doesn't he follow Ramanuja? What if he has a brain of his own? That's another possibility. So, yeah. Yeah.
Because of the different interpretations of these sages.
Yes.
But Shankara is not an ordinary guy.
No, but neither was Ramanuja nor was Sri Ramakrishna. Nor was Sri Ramakrishna.
These are all very highly
Yeah.
philosophical, divine figures.
So the thing is, we should not study one philosophy and take that as the be-all, end-all truth, and then read every other saint through that lens, because that would be a mistake. That's all I'm saying.
Just trying to relate that.
Yeah. Okay. So please, thank you very much. Thank you for initiating discussion. Yes, in the back, and then we'll go. Yeah. So remind me of your name. Yeah. Why don't you speak at the mic?
Yeah.
Your name again?
My name is Debashish Sarkar. And the only comment I have is I would look at it not as a difference in a philosophical standpoint, but one person fulfilling another a person who had come before. So in a way, Shankara probably had an understanding which was completely full, Purna, in a sense. He understood the entire reality of things. He put it down. People interpreted it through time. There were some misunderstandings of it. And that was again corrected with the coming of the new person. So in a sense, they are both talking about the same idea, one fulfilling the other, instead of looking at it as a contradiction.
Right. Okay, fine. Prove it. That's the difficulty. You can't just say it. That would become dogmatic. Show me on the basis of Shankara's Sanskrit commentaries that he actually held the same view as Sri Ramakrishna.
Well, Shankara wrote
Bhaja Govindam and Vivekachudamani. Now we begin with the devotional hymns,
to
right?
start talking about the writings of Shankara would take us a long time.
I know. So the point is,
he has written about the ultimate reality.
Yeah.
He has written about Shakti. He has written about almost everything. He was his understanding at that point in time was an essential coming to basically resurrect the situation.
No. Okay, I've heard enough. I've heard enough. Thank you.
I'm not contradicting.
I know. But the thing is, everything you're saying is dogmatic unless you can give evidence.
No, let me complete.
Yeah.
I'm not contradicting what you're saying.
I know,
but all I'm trying to say, is to view it a little differently in the sense that these highly illumined people, they come from time to time, and they help us, mortals, try to understand the situation a little better. So in a way, I would prefer to see it as a continuation.
Wonderful.
Of ideas.
Fulfillment, continuation, everything is wonderful. Wonderful.
Instead of looking at it as
agree.
One more.
Prove it. No. I think you've said enough, honestly. So, it's great. It sounds wonderful. It's very eloquent, but no proof. And so, no, you don't need to say anything, but please let me finish, okay? So the point is, right? It's great to believe all sorts of things about Shankara, but prove it on the basis of evidence. And the thing is, when you study the commentaries carefully, he does talk about Shakti, but what does he say about Shakti? He says that ultimately Shakti is not real. This is a fact. He does talk about Jagat.
No, I don't agree.
I know, so prove it. Because I can pull out the quotes right now if you want.
Then
from
if
the
you
original
have the
Sanskrit.
quotes with you.
I have them.
Yeah, why don't you bring out what Shankara told about Shakti?
Wonderful. It's in the book that was published last year. Okay, sure. Okay, so I'm giving you Gambhiranandaji's translation of Shankara's commentary on Brahma Sutra 2.1.14. Write it down or look it up, okay? He says, thus, Ishvara's, meaning Saguna Brahman, personal God, Shakti. Thus, Ishvara's rulership, omniscience, and omnipotence are dependent on the limiting adjuncts, upadhis, conjured up by ignorance, avidya. But from the ultimate standpoint, such terms as the ruler, the ruled, omniscience, etc., cannot be used with regard to the Atman in its true nature after the removal of all limiting adjuncts through knowledge. Tad evam avidyatmakopadi parichedapeksham eva ishvarasya ishvaratvam sarvajnatvam sarvashaktitvam chana paramattato vidyaya apasta sarvopadi swarupe atmani ishitra ishitavya sarvakyatwadi vyavahara upapadyate. Original Sanskrit. So now you give me your evidence, counter evidence.
Well, to be honest,
and good luck. Yeah.
To be honest with you, I must admit that I first follow what you just said.
Okay, so but in either language, I gave you English and Sanskrit. And you're speaking in nice English right now.
I understand that.
Okay, I'll explain it. It's very simple, actually. What Shankara is saying is, yes, what is Ishvara, Shakti? Saguna Brahman. It is the personal God. What does it mean? What does the personal God mean? It's God with the omni attributes. Yeah, form, but omni attributes. What are omni attributes? This is a term used in philosophy of religion. Omniscience, which means all-knowing. Omnipotence, which means all-powerful. Perfectly loving. He loves all of us equally and without any kind of partiality. These are the wonderful omni attributes, the attributes of God. What does he say about them? So the God that we pray to and that we love, right? The God who responds to our prayers, he says, all of those attributes are conjured up by ignorance. Avidya kalpita is the Sanskrit. Ignorance of what? Of Nirguna Brahman, which is the only truth. And so long as we are ignorant of Nirguna Brahman, we imagine, we superimpose all of these omni attributes onto Brahman. And then we say, oh Lord, please save me and give me liberation and give me devotion. All of it's at the level of ignorance. And when we know the truth, which is non-dual Brahman, it turns out that the personal God never existed. There was just Brahman all along.
And I think that is confirmed by what Shankara talks about, that the ultimate reality is Nirguna. But there are stages which we go through to reach it at that point. And exactly what Thakur also talks about. So they are, in my view, they are identical. They are just talking a little bit in a different flavor. Shankara, at this time, he was basically propounding Advaita. Advaita is mainly Nirguna. You know that is highly.
You didn't attend my lecture in the morning. Did you attend my talk this morning?
Well, I didn't have
Remember what I said? I said Shankara does not have a monopoly on Advaita. And there are other Advaitic philosophies which do not affirm the sole reality of Nirguna Brahman. Yeah. Is he going to attack me or is he? I must talk about this. Yes, please continue.
Because the words that you're using. Because
online question. Oh, I don't need to read comments. I can read them later. But are there any questions? If you see any questions, then you can. I'll read these later. That's okay. Thank you. Otherwise, it'll be a diversion. Okay. Thank you. And let me know if there are any questions.
I agree with all of what you say.
Yeah.
What I do not agree are some of the words that you're using.
Yeah.
For example, just in a little while ago, you used the word monopoly.
Yeah.
Nobody is talking about monopoly. Nobody is saying Shankara has a monopoly over.
Well, you just
Advaita.
said that Advaita means Nirguna Brahman.
No, that doesn't mean monopoly.
You're the one with the monopoly, not me.
No, I didn't say that.
So anyway, okay. So let's let other people talk. Let's let other people talk.
No,
let's let other people talk because it's a little
reason,
obnoxious.
Let me hear because you wanted to take it as a debate. The reason
this is a useless debate because I gave you evidence after you demanded it, and then you're giving me nothing in return.
It is important.
So please, okay. So now you can come, and then you can take the mic from him, and then.
It is important.
Okay. Thank you. I've heard enough.
No, just a second, because you have incited a person.
Okay, see, this is the problem. You're speaking out of emotion. You're not speaking from a standpoint of logic and reasoning. That's
I am.
You are. Look at you now. You've lost your temper. That's not helpful. That's not helpful.
No, because of the words that are being used.
Yeah.
But
okay.
et cetera. Do you agree that you have used the word monopoly?
Yes.
Did I say the word monopoly?
I think somebody needs to calm down. I think somebody needs to calm down, and it's not me.
No, this is the reason I'm saying. Let me tell one other thing
You've been talking for so long, and I think people are tired of hearing you.
No, let me say one other thing.
No, you don't need to.
No, I do. No, just a second.
Yeah.
No.
Is this not a monopoly? Who's monopolizing the microphone right now? Yeah. Go on ranting. Go ahead. Yeah.
The question that is to be decided here is if we are going to have a dialogue or we are going to basically enforce a certain viewpoint. I'm a follower of your very ideas that you follow too. But my understanding of the way things are very different. I do not treat it as a monopoly of one person over the other. Neither do I treat it as one following the other. These are very important. And because I care about these ideas that you are here to say, I do want to raise my voice on it.
Are
I
you
hope you
finished?
will. I hope.
Are you
I hope
finished?
I hope you will understand.
Okay, next question. We don't need to discuss, but next question. So who had the next? Yeah, you can take the mic. Yeah, please.
Hi, I'm Shri. I guess I had kind of a simple question is, you spoke about Nirguna Brahman and Saguna Brahman.
Yeah.
For Nirguna Brahman, typically you say it's Brahman without attributes, but you also say Satchidananda is Nirguna Brahman. So that's just, you just said three, I mean, we just said three attributes. So how can we say it's Brahman without attributes? Because there are three attributes. So how would you reconcile that?
Yeah. So Sri Ramakrishna refers to God as Satchitananda, right? But according to Sri Ramakrishna, Brahman is not only Nirguna, it's also Saguna. So Satchitananda is both personal and impersonal, both with form and without form. So then there's no problem, right?
Got it. But just as a matter of definition, when we say God without form, and then we give it three attributes. Yeah.
Yeah. So the thing is, yeah. So have you studied Shankara's commentary in Taittiriya Upanishad where he talks about Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam, Brahma, and he says these seem to be positive attributes, but then that compromises non-duality. So he gives them negative interpretations. He says Sat means, each one is like Chit means not insentient. So there are ways of getting around that problem. The thing is, Sri Ramakrishna doesn't have that issue because he's not just defining the ultimate reality as Nirguna Brahman. So then he's perfectly happy to say that God has positive attributes. God loves us, God is omniscient, God is omnipotent. Shankara has a problem with it because he doesn't accept the ultimate reality of the personal God.
Got it. Do you think it's a problem of language also? Like we cannot, describe a non-dual Brahman using the words that we use. So we need to say something. That's why we say Satchidananda.
Yeah, ultimately we have to, no words can capture the ultimate reality. That's certainly true. But you can experience it through spiritual experience.
I guess one other question I had, different topic now, is earlier you spoke about involution. Viloma, I think was the word, is
Anuloma, Viloma. Involution, evolution.
So, and for example, you use the metaphor of the spider, and like the universe comes out of the spider like a cobweb and then it goes back in. How is that different from Vishishta Advaita? Because there we say like, Krishna is the ultimate reality and we are all just part of Krishna's divine reality. So how is involution, I guess, the same or different from that?
Yeah, so Sri Ramakrishna himself says that the Vijnani's vision of this world as Brahman is very similar to Ramanuja's Vishtadvaita. He says it, in fact, in several places in the Gospel, once, on a very significant occasion, to Naren, to Swami Vivekananda himself. And then the question, right, that's why M thought that Sri Ramakrishna was a follower of Vishtadvaita, actually, which I mentioned is censored out of Nikhilananda's translation. But there are some differences between Ramanuja and Sri Ramakrishna. Remember, I mentioned this very briefly in the morning, but I'll say it again. Or maybe pop quiz, this will be better. According to Ramanuja, what is the ultimate reality?
Krishna's divine form.
Yeah, only Saguna. Only Saguna. Only Saguna. Shankara says only Nirguna. Ramanuja says only Saguna. Now, is that Sri Ramakrishna's view?
Half and half.
Not half and half. That's then it becomes where you add your coffee. But no, it's Jini Nirgun Tini Shogun in Bangla. Vijnani dekhe Jini Nirgun Tini Shogun. The Vijnani sees that divine reality, which is Nirguna, is also Saguna. Equally both. Ramanuja will never accept that. And so therefore, Ramanuja will not even accept Sri Ramakrishna's concept of Vijnana. Why? Because Vijnana comes after Jnana. Jnana pore Vijnana. That means first Jnana, then Vijnana. Ramanuja will accept neither Jnana nor Vijnana in Sri Ramakrishna's sense. Why? Jnana means knowledge of non-dual Brahman in Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Ramanuja says Nirguna Brahman doesn't exist. Doesn't accept Jnana. Vijnana is a stage after the attainment of the knowledge of Nirguna Brahman, in which one sees that the reality is both Nirguna and Saguna, and Ramanuja says that's wrong too, because Brahman is only Saguna and not Nirguna. So those are the key philosophical differences.
Okay.
By the time we leave this place, we probably
Thank you.
in following 10 different principles.
I think that'll be good. Why not? I want people to think for themselves. That's what I'd like. I don't want anybody to just blindly follow what I'm, yeah. The more the merrier.
Thank you, Swamiji. My
Yeah.
name is Vani Rao. I think in spiritual discussions, decorum is extremely important. So I so appreciate I came here to learn from you. And so for those of us who are in this discussion, if you're irritated, let it go. And let's bring our focus back to this conversation here. So my question for you is to make sure my notes are correct.
Yeah, please.
If you can, make sure I understand. Shankara affirms everything is Brahman as the substratum of the universe, and therefore names and forms must dissolve.
Well,
And-
even dissolve is not quite right. I mean, he uses that language, but ultimately, dissolve means that it once was, right?
Okay,
But actually, they never were at all. It's like the snake. There never was a snake. There was the rope all along. That's actually the
so
Shankara.
what would be the correct word then instead of dissolve?
Well, it's dissolved from the standpoint of somebody who once saw a world. Because then, so it's like Sri Ramakrishna saying, you do neti neti vichara, you reach the roof. And then you come down from the state of samadhi as a jivan mukta. What do you see? Oh, wait a minute. Now I see that none of this stuff is real. What I once thought was real, I now see as a dream, as an illusion.
Okay, and so the
Yeah.
second part then is Ramakrishna says that the names and forms are part of the divine play of Brahman, and then that nothing needs to be dissolved. Is that correct?
Yeah, nothing needs to be excluded. Everything is Brahman. Everything is divine consciousness.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
Thank you.
absolutely right. Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah, thank you. Yes, back there, Shubha, right?
I wanted your opinion on free will.
Sorry, say it again.
Your
Yeah, no, I just missed the first part.
opinion on free
my-
will.
Okay.
When we think about Saguna philosophy, it kind of goes, yeah, maybe I have free will and I can act on it and go near God. But when we think about Vijnana Vedanta, I'm not sure how to think about it. So if you can give your opinion how you see it, that would be helpful.
Yeah, again, when people ask me my opinion, I'm not here to give you my opinion.
No, but
I'm here to
you
try
have
to
studied, right? You have studied so much.
But
so-
I'm here to explain to you how I understand Sri Ramakrishna's views.
Yes.
Let me be clear about.
Yes.
It's not random speculations of Medhananda.
Yes.
So yes, what are Sri Ramakrishna's views on free will and determinism? There's no free will. It's a little bit more complicated than that. So what he says is, if you study the gospel carefully, what you'll find him saying is that, in fact, none of us have any free will whatsoever. But so long as we have not realized God, we cannot help but think that we are free and morally responsible for our actions. You might ask why? Because God, in her infinite wisdom, has implanted in us the illusion of free will so as to prevent us from committing even more sin than we already commit. Jate papit vriddhi na hoy, in Bangla is the way you would put it. Yeah. Yeah. Correct. What is predetermined? Yeah. Well, because it's in this scheme, in this world scheme, in which people have to believe that they have free will, in which there's less sin. That's the idea. In the other scheme, which would also have been predetermined, there would have been more sin, but God chose to predetermine the world in a way with less sin. Of course, there's still sin. There's plenty of sin to go around. But it would have been much, much worse if people actually walked around knowing that God is a doer. It would have been a scary world. And then he adds, once you realize God, you might say, well, that person could commit all sorts of sins and say that God is a doer. That's true, he says. But if you realize God, you cannot take a false step. Pa betale porena. Yeah, thank you. Anyone else?
I would like to comment.
Oh, but why don't you take the microphone?
The reason I mentioned about Sat Chit Ananda is the ultimate Brahman, which is a Nirguna Brahman. And I'm studying, comparing the Shankaracharya versus Sri Ramakrishna explanation and these definitions. And then Ramana Maharshi also. Then I see everyone is God. I see God in every one of them. But when I compare the explanation, I'm getting confused. And when you started explaining, you referred to Sat Chit Ananda also. That is the reason I mentioned it. Okay, even Ramana Maharshi,
Yeah.
my intention is not to spend a lot of time on it. He basically said, just explore yourself. Who am I? That concept.
Yeah. Self-inquiry.
You get the answers.
Yeah.
Okay, basically you become Nirguna Brahman yourself
Yeah.
and ultimate reality.
Yeah.
And then I also look at the definitions of the Tattva Bodha by Adi Sankara. He says Saguna Brahman is really Prakriti, which is Shakti. So there's the confusion there for me. Wait a minute. You're saying Sri Ramakrishna says, Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa says, Saguna Brahman also is like Nirguna Brahman.
Not like.
Well, is ultimate God.
It's
You're saying
inseparable.
That and this.
That reality, which is Nirguna, is also Saguna. That's his exact formulation.
Yeah. So, but Shankara, Adi Shankara says Nirguna is the highest,
Yeah.
Saguna is the lowest,
I agree.
which is controlled by
Yeah.
Shakti.
So they
or
conflict with
Prakriti.
these views conflict with each other. But what's the confusion? But what, can you follow up? What exactly is the confusion?
No, that's it. That's all I'm saying.
Oh.
Saguna and Nirguna are separate. Saguna is,
Who says it's separate?
because Saguna is, we have Tamas, Rajas and all that. Like
No. Saguna Brahman is the personal God, Shakti. And then Shakti manifests as tables and chairs and laptops.
I thought Shakti is the
Yeah.
main root of the universe. And Brahman is the
It's not
highest.
even root, it's even more than that. Remember the spider in the cobweb? Shakti has become everything in the universe. Like clay is shaped into pots and like gold is shaped into different ornaments. Yeah.
That is Shakti.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay? And Nirguna Brahman, beyond that,
Who says that? According to you or Sri Ramakrishna or Shankara?
Shankara.
I know, but we're talking about Sri Ramakrishna, right?
No, because you also mentioned, the reason I raised my hand was
Yeah.
when you read that passage,
Yeah.
you also, I thought I heard
Yeah.
Sat Chit Ananda. Wait a minute. If that is being,
But Satchitananda is a pan-Vedantic term used by all the Vedantic schools. Ramanuja also accepts Satchitananda, Madhva also accepts Satchitananda, Advaitins accept Satchitananda, Sri Ramakrishna uses Satchitananda, but they interpret that Satchitananda differently. And I think the confusion comes from the fact that you're already conditioned to define Satchitananda in terms of Shankara's framework. But there are many other ways of defining the same Satchitananda. And Sri Ramakrishna gives a broader definition of Satchitananda as Brahma Shakti.
okay.
That's all. I hope that clears up the confusion.
Swamiji, do we agree Sat Chit Ananda is the ultimate Brahman or not?
I agree with Sri Ramakrishna that Satchitananda is Brahma Shakti.
I see, I heard your statement.
Yeah,
We all read and hear about all these different prophets.
right. Yeah.
But ultimately, we have to decide. Every one of us is a Brahman. Aham Brahmasmi. We have to say, I'm asking you a question. What is your opinion, Medhananda? What is your opinion? You
Yeah.
took Swami Sri Ramakrishna opinion.
Yeah.
Okay, but what is
Yeah.
your opinion, sir?
I'm a follower of Sri Ramakrishna. So his opinion is my opinion. Sorry to be boring, but that's my view. Anyone else? Okay. Going once, going twice. Yeah, okay. Thank you. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. Thank you, everyone. This is somebody's phone. Yeah. What time is Arati? In 15 minutes, okay.